Perfect. So, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone joining us today for the May briefing. Glenn is saying it is 7 a.m. for me, so thank you for joining us so early. And perhaps there are other participants from the other side of the world for whom it is very late. So we appreciate your joining us. I take the opportunity to introduce my colleagues here. Who are experts in the different topics, and who will, together with me, we will cover the main update, the main developments and the trends for May. And so I'll introduce Arvin Kamberi. I'm following the order in which you appear on my screen. So Arvin Kamberi, Vladimir Radunovic, Sorina Teleanu, Marilia Maciel, Katerina Hunne, and that's me, Stephanie Borgseiler, from DiploFoundation and the Geneva Internet Platform. So I think we can immediately start by looking at the main events that took place in May. And actually, it's still a few days to go, so there are still events ongoing. And I'll start from the bottom. There's the AI for Good Global Summit in Geneva. It started today, some also sessions yesterday, but it runs until the end of the week. And we will be following the main discussions there. If you look at the list of the main events, there was also CEDIG taking place in Bucharest, the CSTD meeting in Geneva, and one of the outcomes of the CSTD meeting was, if I'm not mistaken, 22nd session, is a new policy review framework. And with this framework, basically, a country can assess whether its science, technology, and innovation policies, they are in line with the objectives. There was also the Christchurch Call summit in Paris, middle of the month, and we shall talk more in depth about that. World Health Assembly, EBU Media Summit, so quite a busy calendar in May. These are just the main events. There were other events throughout the month, and for reports about these events, you can consult the Digital Watch Observatory /past events for reports. So there is the URL on the slide, as you can see there. So I'll move forward, and we will cover the main development. So we will first start by looking at our barometer, the barometer of trends, which indicates the prominence of issues compared to the previous month. So we look at what has happened basically in May, and the icons on the left-hand side indicate the prominence of the issue in comparison with the previous month. And here we will highlight some of the, let's say, main developments before then going through the trends to see what the main, by connecting the dots among the developments to see what the main trends were. And here we can highlight with regards to security, obviously the Huawei battle continues, but we will be covering that in a few minutes. Vlada will tell us more about that. The same, I'm going through the slides. Security, the same for, again, the Christchurch Call. And if we go forward to the e-commerce developments, there are quite some interesting developments there related to Airbnb and Uber. So perhaps I can give the floor immediately to Marilia to tell us more about these couple of developments.
Thank you very much, Steph, and good afternoon to everyone. And the first development is related to Airbnb. There was a legal opinion that was recently issued by the Advocate General of the Court of Justice of the European Union, considering that Airbnb is an information society service. This legal opinion is non-binding. However, in the great majority of the cases, the court takes into consideration the opinion of its Advocate General. And the opinion, although non-binding, is already inspiring discussions elsewhere. So in France, for instance, there is a legal proceeding in which reference was made to this particular legal opinion. It's a case in which a French tourism association is requiring Airbnb to be subject to the same regulations that apply to the real estate sector in France. So the case will have significant consequences for the future of Airbnb in Europe. It will influence the way that European countries will regulate Airbnb, because if the company is considered to be an information society service, then countries will have much less leeway to regulate Airbnb, and they cannot just translate the regulation that applies to the different offline sectors into the platforms. Just remembering that a similar case was examined by the court a few years ago, in the case referring to Uber. But in this case, the European court ruled that Uber should be was not going to be considered an information society service, and thereafter several countries have put in place some initiatives to regulate Uber more tightly. And the final judgment is expected for later this year, so we will definitely keep an eye on this development in the future. The other development in the economic issues is related to Uber. There were protests with regards to the conditions that Uber drivers are subject to in many capitals around the world. And this happened one day before the company's initial public offering. They claim that the conditions that Uber drivers are subject to are not ideal. The wages that they are paid are inferior to what they would expect. The company takes a large share of what is paid in the car rides, and that the strikes have been coordinated across the world, and this is one of the major demonstrations so far of the insatisfaction, the discontent of Uber drivers with regards to the company. The Uber responded to this by planning to give a cash bonus to Uber drivers in the US. But at the same time that US Uber drivers had this good news of a bonus, they also received a very hard setback in the US because the national regulator of the application of labor laws, which is an independent agency, has concluded that Uber drivers are independent contractors. They should not be considered employees. And this classification as independent contractors means that all the traditional rights that applies to workers, such as the right to bargain collectively, the right to form a union, the right to have a minimum wage pay, that would not apply to Uber drivers. This is a non-binding opinion of the US independent regulator. However, that could be taken into consideration on future rulings on the matter. So we will also keep an eye on that, how this will develop, if other countries will follow the lead of this regulator in the US or not. Over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Marilia, for that excellent summary of these two developments. You mentioned the Uber judgment. For those of you who were at the IGF in Geneva, I recall that the judgment came right during the IGF in December 2017. So we recall that quite well. And with regards to the Airbnb case, at the moment it is the Advocate General's opinion, as Marilia said. So we will see whether the court will confirm the opinion or will give a different view. Normally the court follows the advice, but there were the rare cases in which the court did not follow to the letter. So those were the very interesting updates on Uber and Airbnb. Related again to e-commerce, so we're staying on this issue for the moment. There is also an interesting update regarding Facebook and cryptocurrency. So I'll give the floor to Arvin. Arvin, what is going on with Facebook?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hope everyone can hear me now. as Stefan just mentioned, there was a development which we follow closely for the last few months, and it's regarding the Facebook announcement they're creating a digital currency for their native system. As we all know, the Facebook is an owner of three large major social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. So WhatsApp Messenger is targeted as a first test software on which this global coin will be implemented. It has, reading the Facebook reports, we see that it's dubbed as a global coin now, and it will actually serve as a settlement layer for the Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp users to exchange the money directly. Similar as to many online payment services already there, like M-Pesa or PayApp or those similar paying services. What Facebook is actually doing, they are searching now the ways, or looking to the ways with the regulators to actually regulate this emission of their own digital currency. Just having in mind that, of course, if they launch it, they will need to comply with the laws as money transmitters and money transfers. So there's a different set of laws which tackles the money transfer online. So this might be a regulatory. Facebook might hit the regulatory wall, of course, also regarding the provisions and the regulations around fighting terrorism or preventing the financing of terrorism. So in that sense, Facebook will also need to comply with many regulations around knowing your customer and other, and to be careful not to create a global coin which will be kind of a vessel for the money laundering. So all those issues are there for Facebook. They already started the pilot program in India with WhatsApp India, which is a separated entity in Facebook, and it's running 2 months now. They see a significant improvement, so that's why they're thinking about going globally, and the set date for this is 2020. So we will follow closely these developments, and we'll let you know. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Arvin, for the overview related to Facebook's new plans. For those of you who have just joined us, you're joining the briefing on digital policy developments in May, and this is for everyone. If you have any questions or comments, any points for discussion, please write them in the text field that you can see, and Marco will communicate these with us. We can obviously read them, but Marco will summarize the questions for us. Arvin, back to Facebook. We know that Facebook has quite ambitious plans, merging the 3 instant messenger applications, and then having all the businesses, or as many businesses as possible, on the platforms, and enabling the paying services, as you well said, and then Facebook getting a cut from there. My question is, why a cryptocurrency?
Well, Stephanie, there is no clear reason why it is a cryptocurrency and why using cryptocurrency in such endeavor. Because all paying apps are using the regular money, to say. But the initial idea why using cryptocurrency was actually to avoid the regulation around the issuing money, money transmitters, and other regulations. But the Facebook is really, really big, and I don't think they can actually manage to do this. How this global coin will work? It will actually be pegged by some common currencies, let's say dollar and euro. So in a sense that you have $1, you will have or get 2 or 1 global coin from Facebook. So basically, it's a level of settlement for them, and between the users in which they can use. So there is no clear idea why cryptocurrency, And to be honest, Facebook already had a similar program at the beginning of 2020 called Credits, which is basically what will be developed here, but on a larger scale. I would say they didn't want to miss the hype of the blockchain world these days, so they just kind of jump into this train.
Thank you, Irvin, for that. And as you said, Facebook will have to tackle quite a few issues related to cryptocurrency there. I'm seeing a question for Marcello, but if you agree, we'll just go through the parameter for May. So it's just a couple of other updates, and then we'll go back to the questions on what we have just questions, comments on what we have just mentioned, and then we move to the trends. So I think more or less we covered e-commerce. If going down to digital rights, the GDPR is 1 year old, and on its 1-year birthday, the Irish Data Protection Commission is facing quite a few investigations. Actually, it has launched quite a few investigations, and from the big companies, Quantcast is the latest company that is being investigated. We're looking, this is a sneak preview for our newsletter coming out at the end of the week. We're looking at the big cases related to the GDPR that have been initiated, so the ongoing investigations, to see what they're about, what exactly is the alleged breach, and we'll have the update of this analysis in the newsletter, which you can download by the end of this week. And so let's move to I think there's another slide of the barometer, exactly. And there is an interesting update from ICANN. So ICANN has is set to approve, but let's see from Sorina. Sorina, what's going on with the .amazon Gtld application?
Thank you, Steph. Hello, everyone. I think it's been a while since we've heard from ICANN, and now it's time to get back to that. Yes, there are some news about the application for .amazon, which comes from the company, from Amazon. And for those of you who are not very familiar with the story, I'll try to briefly tell you what's been happening. It basically all started in 2012 when Amazon, the company, applied for .amazon as its own Gtld in the context of ICANN's new Gtld program. Then in 2013, it was the Governmental Advisory Committee within ICANN which issued an advice to the ICANN board stating that the application for that .amazon should actually not continue. And this was because some countries in South America objected to this, saying, well, there is a region there which is called Amazonia. It's not really okay for a private company to own a domain name which also has geographical significance. And that led the GAC to issue this advice. And interestingly or not, the board accepted the advice, so the application stopped at that point. Then fast forward in 2017, Amazon prevailed in what was called an independent review process, which it failed the year before in 2016. And the result of that independent review process was a recommendation for the ICANN board to reevaluate the application. So at that point, the board asked the GAC for additional advice. The GAC said, well, we keep our advice, but we are asking or advising the board to and ICANN to continue facilitating negotiations between the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, which has as member states some countries from South America, and Amazon, ideally with the aim of reaching some sort of a mutually acceptable solution. Unfortunately, this did not happen. There were some discussions, some attempts to come up with some sort of an agreement, but it never happened. So in 2018, in October, the board directed the ICANN president and CEO to basically go ahead or allow the application to go ahead, remove the will not proceed status, and allow it to be processed in line with the new Gtld program guidelines. So yeah, there has been attempts for Amazon and Acto to come up with some agreement. This did not work, and this month the board passed a new resolution on the same matter, basically reiterating what they said in October 2018, that the ICANN organization should continue to process the application for .amazon in line with whatever procedures the new Gtld program has. And then the second provision in the resolution was for ICANN to publish, and now the name is probably a bit interesting for most of you, the public interest commitments proposed by Amazon for a 30-day period for public comment. What's with these public interest commitments? It's basically an attempt from Amazon to deal with some of the concerns raised by the member states of ACTO. Basically not allowing the registration of domain names, which represent some sort of terms of cultural and historical importance for the region. Then they also commit to give Acto some 9 domains in each Amazon to be used for non-commercial purposes. This is very important, non-commercial purposes. And also block around 105,000 domain names in each TLD, which have a primary and well-recognized, again, cultural significance for Amazon. And also Amazon is suggesting the creation of some sort of a steering committee to assist in the implementation of these public interest commitments. And the steering committee would be set in place through an MOU with ACTO, and it would have 12 members, 1 from ACTO, 8 for each of the member states of ACTO, and 3 for Amazon. Now the public interest commitment has not been published yet, or at least I couldn't see it, but we have ICANN here so they can tell us more. And I guess it's not surprising that some of the countries in Amazon in South America were not happy with this decision, and I think there was a statement from the presidents of Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia saying that they will join forces to protect their countries from what they described as an inadequate governance of the internet, and they saw the decision as some sort of a grave precedent by prioritizing private commercial interests above the consideration of state public policies. So I guess we're not really close to an end. The application is going forward, so ICANN has to do that, but the states in South America are still not happy. So I guess we will see what happens next. Nigel, if you have updates, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarina, for that update about .amazon, and seeing the comment from Nigel. Good history, Zarina, there's a lot more on the ICANN side, and the public interest commitments will be subject to public consultations, of course. So obviously we'll be following that very, very closely. Moving down the slide to new technologies, we have the fact that the development that San Francisco has banned the facial recognition technology, but that we will cover with Katerina. We will cover it as a trend, because San Francisco is not the only city which has reacted to the technology. I think, as usual, it seems AI developments, they do deserve a mention. So, Zarina, I'll give the floor again to you to tell us what recommendations, what developments have been, let's say, published during the month.
Thank you again, Steph. Yes, we have 2 recommendations this month, one from Unesco and the other one for OECD, and I'll try to go through them as briefly as possible, but we have written about them in the Digital Watch, and you have their links, and you can read the overall recommendations. So, first of all, Unesco, they published recently a paper together with Germany and the Equal Skill Coalition, which is looking broadly into issues related to the growing digital skills gender gap, but it also outlines some recommendations for both companies and governments to combat gender bias in artificial intelligence applications. The title of the publication is interesting. I'd blush if I could. It's a reference to Alexa. Those of you using it know what that is. Closing gender digital divide in digital skills through education. So again, the publication addresses the broader issue of a wider and growing digital skills gender gap, and includes recommendations to help women and girls develop strong skills for education, while also explaining what UNESCO calls the ICT gender equality paradox. Basically, countries with the highest level of gender equality, general one, also have the lowest proportion of women pursuing advanced career in computer science. So indeed, a paradox. So in this broader paper, there is a distinct chapter, a publication which looks at how AI voice assistants projected as young women perpetuate harmful gender bias. And in this context, there are recommendations meant to help ensure that the proliferation of digital assistants do not widen gender divide. So there are some recommendations for companies. They are encouraged to stop making digital assistants female by default and instead looking into some sort of a neutral machine gender for voice assistants, which are neither male nor female. That should be interesting to put together. And then also program digital assistants to discourage gender-based insult and abusive language, and encourage interoperability so users can basically change digital assistants as desired. And there are also some recommendations for governments. They are advised to use public procurement and funding as a driver of gender equality in the development of artificial intelligence, and then also establish accountability mechanisms and public oversight to mitigate or prevent algorithmic bias and the violation of rights, including gender rights. And broader, there is a call for teams building AI technologies to be more gender balanced to avoid what has just been described. And there was also an interesting stat saying that women are actually accounting for only 12% of all AI researchers. So that should give us all a bit of food for thought how we can go forward from this. So this was from UNESCO. Now going to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, their Ministerial Council adopted a recommendation on artificial intelligence outlining some principles for what they call the responsible stewardship of trustworthy AI, basically making sure that artificial intelligence is developed and used in line with human rights principles, democracy, and basic rule of law. So the recommendation calls on all AI actors to work towards artificial intelligence which promotes inclusive growth, sustainable development, and well-being, and again to implement mechanisms and standards that support AI systems in line with the rule of law, human rights, democratic values, and diversity. There is also a call for the actors involved in the development and use of artificial intelligence to ensure transparency and responsible disclosure so people can actually understand what's behind an AI system, how they work, understand the outcomes, and then also be able to challenge them based on how and what they know about the functioning of AI systems. Then there is a recommendation about AI systems which have to be robust, secure, and safe throughout the entire life cycle, so not only during the development phase, and the developers being accountable for how the systems function again throughout the entire life cycle. And there are also some recommendations targeted specifically at governments, which are invited to do a few things. First of all, to put more money into AI research and development, so basically allocate long-term public investments and encourage also private investments and public-private partnerships. Then foster the development of what is being described as a digital ecosystem for trustworthy AI, so basically making available digital technologies and infrastructures for people to be able to develop AI on their own, and also creating mechanisms for sharing data and knowledge for the development of AI, and shape an enabling policy environment for artificial intelligence, which means looking at the existing laws and regulations and making sure that they do not stifle competition and innovation when it comes to the development of new AI systems. And of course, there is also some focus on skills and preparing the workforce for the future of work. So governments are encouraged to empower people with the skills for AI and prepare them for the transition of the labor market. And that recommendation was endorsed by 36 members of the organization, plus 6 other countries which are not yet part of the organization. And these are Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, and Romania. There is some follow-up work to be done. The OECD Committee on Digital Economy Policy will develop some implementation guidelines, so guidelines for the guidelines, monitor their implementation, and within 5 years' time report to the Council on how these recommendations have been implemented, whether they are still relevant, and whether they need to be improved. So that's that on the OECD side. And one more thing, the OECD also plans to develop what they call an AI Policy Observatory, basically to put together information about existing AI strategy, what the organization is doing in the field of AI, and helping governments better prepare for taking advantage of what artificial intelligence is. So we'll keep an eye on this also and see if more countries adhere to the recommendations. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you, Sarina, for the in-depth overview of those two sets of recommendations. And I'll briefly refer you to an article, data analysis, in our last month newsletter, which looked at the AI national strategies, and I think the article is called Dissecting AI National Strategies, in which we looked at the existing ones and analyzed what their main objectives were. So it's a very interesting article. In case you missed it, it's in the April's newsletter. And also there's once again the AI for Good summit this week. So again, more discussions on AI will continue. And on ICANN, as Nigel, so back to the ICANN update, as Nigel pointed out, thank you, Nigel, for that. There's the ICANN 65 in Marrakesh at the end of this month, which again will continue the discussions. And I think that brings us to the end of this part of the briefing, which is the barometer. And here I think I'll stop and take, I can a few comments, and Marco is online to gather the comments together. So one of the questions from Marcello is for Arvin, and Arvin Marcello asks, I'd like to know if the creation of this cryptocurrency by Facebook could indicate an intention of the company to become a multitask platform similar to WeChat in China, for instance. So if you want to take that.
Yes.
And there is a comment from Salah relation to Huawei, but Salah will cover that in a few minutes, so I'll keep your comment on hold and then tackle it right after.
Thanks, Stephanie. Well, yes, in answer to the last question, that is a clear object from Facebook. It's actually reaching the Tencent's WeChat Pay, or Alibaba's affiliate, which is Ant Financial Alipay, account for 90% of the industry of mobile payments now. And those are like, those numbers are in $1 trillion. So yes, the main objective is actually to become this platform, this unified platform on which you can just pay whatever, instantly see and pay and transfer the money. So yes, the idea is to actually tackle the major providers for this online payments, such as Alibaba, Alipay, or Ant Financial or WeChat. So yes, as an answer to the second question, and I see it, Sala is asking you, didn't Facebook already did this? Yes, as I mentioned, it did it. They did it as a form of credits, which is actually a kind of the same. So yes, it's not going to be the first time for Facebook to try this. And yes, the idea is to reach Alipay and WeChat.
Thank you, Arvin, for from replying to the questions. I'm seeing a very good comment from Nigel. Did I miss an update on the UN panel on digital cooperation? No, you did not miss it, but we have it at the end, Nigel. So you have to stick with us till the end of the briefing. All right. So Nigel will forgive me for joking with him. So now we'll continue with the trends. So it's basically here where we connect the dots between all the developments that have taken place throughout the month and throughout the last month, and by connecting the dots, the following trends, we have identified the following trends as the main ones. And they're perhaps also indicative of what we can expect in the coming months. Obviously, the biggest, I would say, the biggest issue of the month continues to be Huawei, and there have been updates this month. And here I'll give the floor to Vlada to tell us what the updates were and how, maybe what to expect in the forthcoming period. Vladimir, over to you.
Thanks, Steph. And hello from the transit in Istanbul airport. I hope my Wi-Fi will survive. If the voice cut, I'll probably have to switch off my ugly face so I can just speak. But in the meantime, it's interesting, and Salah reminded me in her comment, we actually covered where we are with Huawei within the newsletter, which is available online. My colleagues can share the link. So there's where you can catch up with something that was written maybe 2 weeks ago. And since these 2 weeks, I've put up 2.5 pages of updates. So the things are really developing with a fast pace, and I'll try to summarize it briefly. So the main development, which we also updated in the newsletter, was the issuing of the executive order by President Trump. And basically it bans the export of the American technology, particularly intellectual property rights, to all those that are not secure partners, and definitely implying to Huawei directly and the Chinese partners. And the important bit is that it doesn't refer necessarily only to the US companies. It also refers to any other companies which trade with the US intellectual property rights. And soon we'll see why that is important. Different question is whether the US has leverage to actually impose this decision to those that are not in the US, but that's a different thing. The ban wouldn't or won't impact the current products and versions, but will impact everything that come as an innovation of the US intellectual property rights. The main problem is that the US intellectual property rights are all across digital products, and it's quite hard to see any of the products which doesn't have intellectual property rights of the US, also of the other partners, and in that sense, this is a big strike. Unlike with the ZTE, where we had the ban by the US because of the sanctions, because of the breaking the sanctions with Iran and so on, where actually there was a window of opportunity left for ZTE to solve the problems and get back. Here we see that White House has labeled Huawei in a way as a national security threat. And there is no specification of how this could be resolved. So it's probably part of the negotiations and trade, but we can't see the way out in a way. Now the first next step that was, or the news that was there, was actually about Google joining or adhering to the ban with regards to the Android market or Android operational system. Now, Android OS is the base of all the Huawei, most of the Huawei devices. While in China they use the open source version because the Chinese are not the Chinese population is not that dependent on the other Google products like Gmail, Maps and stuff. They have their own versions. In Europe and other places, people use, on Huawei, they use the proprietary operational system of Google, the Android, which allows them to also access Gmail, Google Play, and thus Gmail, Maps and stuff. The problem is now with this ban that with cutting out the Android operational system from Huawei, basically all of those markets which are out of China won't be able to access any other Google Play or Google and other products which are available through Google Play. This is not necessarily a problem in China, but it will definitely be a problem in Europe, where most of my friends now these days ask me, should I buy a Huawei device now? So what are the effects? On the short term, basically, particularly with this special 90 days permission that I'll mention in a minute, Huawei won't have any problem. So we'll be able to update our phones, we'll be able to access the Google Play market. The problem will come with the new models of phones. So let's say within the next year, probably Huawei won't have a big problem. Then on the mid-scale or mid-term, 1 to 2 years, they may suffer because of this effect. But on the longer term, Huawei is already developing their own operational system and their own set of applications. Now, the Europeans or the Western world might be still attached to the Google products and the other products to Google Play. But actually, Huawei may set the trend in developing countries, particularly Asia, Africa, and elsewhere where they're very present, that people detach from Google and the Western products, and it can actually be a blowback to Google and the US market. And another interesting food for thought is whether once we know that the proprietary software depends on politics, as in this case, are we all going to be more prone to experiment with open source? So that could be a wind in the back of the open source community. The question is whether the open source community will find a way how to use this chance and promote the independence of politics, basically, as open source is. Then the next update came by the Department of Commerce, which is sort of a softening of a decision, allowing sort of a special 90 days permissions, particularly to Google, so that they could extend the cooperation with Huawei and the other Chinese companies. And it can apply to any other companies that might, US companies that might ask for a license. But the spokesperson of the Department of Commerce was very clear, saying the license requests involving Huawei or its affiliates will be reviewed under a presumption of denial. So by default, it will be denial, and then maybe in some cases it would actually be extended. And then here comes the fun part. After Google, we've heard the news that Intel, Qualcomm, and the chip producers will actually be also ceasing the cooperation with Huawei. Now, that's the trick. The chip production is a very complex global endeavor. And there are different parts of the industry which are specific or have expertise and knowledge and skills to do different parts, from logical architecture of the chips to print design of the chips to assembling and production of the chips. Well, the Chinese have been actually doing production of the chips. Down that level of production, you have firstly to design the print of the chips. And that was done by Intel, Qualcomm, and AMD. And Huawei imported 1/6 of all the components from the US companies. So in a way, this could be a big blow. At the same time, we've heard that since 2012, HiSilicon, a part of the Huawei, was actually trying to improve its production to be able to also work on a print design of the chips, including the CPUs, the processors for the units. That might make them independent from the US industry. Now, let's not forget that Huawei phone industry is probably just one small part of it. It's all the telecom, all the IT hardware, and now more and more AI, IoT devices and so on. All of them are also huge field of the Huawei work. And then there is a particular interesting company, part of this big supply chain, which is a Taiwan semiconductor company, a couple of them, which also use parts of the US intellectual property rights. So the big question is whether the Taiwan companies would also cease cooperation with the Chinese, and they're definitely not in a nice position. And then that might also possibly cause escalation of tensions between Chinese, Taiwan, and US, if you want to look at the dark side of the coin. When it comes to the effects, on the short term, the Chinese have the stocks for most of the processing units and chips they need. On the midterm, in a way, they may suffer because they might need more time to develop their own industry. On the long term, however, let's say 3+ years, they might be able to take over the lead with their own know-how in chip industry and might be completely detached from the US. So long term, actually, the US may be the one who might be the loser. At the same time, we have to evaluate the effects on Intel, Qualcomm, and the others when it comes to the economic impact of not cooperating with one of the biggest sellers and vendors in the world, which is Huawei. And then the last bit, which is probably the key. As we go down to the production of chips, actually the first step in the production is the logical architecture. That's a lot of maths and in a way, logical architecture of the hardware. And there is literally almost a single company which does it, called ARM, which develops the logical architecture. And then it provides the logical architecture after it tests it to Intel, Qualcomm, even HiSilicon of Huawei and the others. Now, their chips or their logical architecture is everywhere in almost all devices we know today. Huawei was part of this consortium in a way, huge global consortium of building up the whole supply chain. And if the ARM, which is basically acquired by SoftBank in Japan recently, it has a UK headquarters. It's a global industry, but it does have a lot of US intellectual property in it. If they cut supplies to Huawei, that will be a huge blow. Because developing capabilities to do the logical architecture is a huge problem, not only for Chinese, but for many. Because it's so intertwined on interdependence of global actors. So we'll see. The ARM generally said they will obey to the Department of Commerce rules, but they might ask for a waiver. Now, what are the effects? On the short term, 1 year, again, the Chinese have the stocks. On the midterm, they'll probably have to suffer. On the long term, but that might be 4+ years, it's not certain how much time they would need to actually develop capabilities to compete with ARM. Now, back to the consequences, what would be the effect on ARM and the whole industry if Huawei is out? And then could this limit in the design of the chips actually be sort of a reason to accelerate the cyber espionage by Chinese in order to get to the intellectual property rights? That's going to be quite an interesting thing. And to conclude, there are a couple of quite important things. One is the whole chip-making progress in the recent decade was possible exactly because of the focused innovation around the world. So we have different bits and pieces of the supply chain developing in the US, in Europe, in China, and Russia. And only because they were cooperating and, in a way, split the tasks, we had this progress. Fragmentation of the chip production process will slow down the overall global innovation in this field, which will strike back all of us, the US equally. And then my take is, or my thinking is that the Rubicon has already been crossed. We have seen, or the companies have seen, that the political dependence of this supply chain of the chip or the tech industry is very high. So that means that more and more countries will turn to safeguarding their supplies and supply chains internally, which actually means that everyone will focus to try to do everything. When everyone tries to do everything, not much will be done actually. Now, what remains to be seen is whether this is just a trick within the negotiations of US and China, which failed on 10th of May, and then a couple of days after we've seen the US decision, or whether this is really an intent of the US to try to destroy Huawei, which might strike back to them. And I'll shut up now. It was a longer expose, but there were really a lot of updates in the meantime. Back to questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thanks, Vlada, for this really great overview of all the controversies and the issues surrounding the Huawei controversy. I think also all the participants here, or all our colleagues who have commented on, Vlada, what you were saying. And you can either read through or I can quickly summarize the comments for you. I don't see any questions, any specific questions, but lots of comments. So for instance, and I'm looking also at the time since we're a bit pressed for time, let me quickly run through the comments. From Salah finds it interesting that the US government blocked the application in the US and created a law to ban it, while in the UK, Ofcom approved the Huawei's 5G. Further down, Fontaine says this is a serious issue. because most devices use the Android operating system, especially in Africa. So Foncam serious issue indeed. Marcello says we should be careful before saying that they are owned by Chinese military. Marshall also rightly points out that we know that the US and China are in the middle of a huge geopolitical and trade conflict. It can just be an excuse for attacking Huawei. Marcello, here I refer you to the article that we ran in the April newsletter, because it is one of the main points that we made. And if you also look at the Economist and other journals that have analyzed this, basically there is this sense of the market power as the underlying issue. Richard, furthermore, iPhones are assembled in China. So if the US were consistent, it should ban the use of iPhones on national security grounds. That's Richard also says, I have not seen any evidence that Huawei installed or knowingly installed malware. And in fact, I think that was also a point that emerged in our analysis. And there is also the issue of rare earths. Most comes from China. If they stop exporting, that might have an effect on US companies. All right, and I'll stop there. Vlada, if what we can do is to let you digest all these comments, we'll go through the next two trends, and then we'll come back to the Huawei comments if you have any other comments to add. What you can also do is type any responses you have in the chat. So the second trend that we identified this month relates to the Christchurch Call. So you recall that unfortunately in March, mid-March, there was the attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, where several people were killed and injured. But the thing was that the attack was live streamed. So the live stream ran for people who were watching for 17 minutes before the video was pulled down. Middle of May, so a couple of weeks ago, the New Zealand Prime Minister and the French President, they got together and they issued the Christchurch Call, which is an initiative to eliminate terrorist, violent and extremist content online. And I'm sure you've seen the text of the Christchurch Call. It's supported by several countries, interestingly not the US, and also many of the major tech companies. Now, one of the relevant points related to the call is that it refocuses a bit the attention from solely from Facebook, Google, and Twitter to let's say a wider set of online service providers. I believe that is the word, that is the phrase that the call uses. So it is instead of having the long negotiations with the tech companies, government may be able to get directly to the companies and say and order them to remove the content, the legal content. So now, as we are seeing with so many other areas like taxation, e-commerce, other types of content, governments are quite clear that they are impatient now, and they are willing to start regulating. And the call, also a relevant point on the call, is that it makes the reference to long-term solutions, so education, etc. There are issues that will need to be resolved in the short and long term. For instance, what do we mean by violent extremism? So that what we mean by that, the definition and interpretation, that needs to be tackled. Also, the call, it promotes AI and tech solutions. So although it promotes them, we know that there are sometimes incorrect results that the technology come out from the filtering of the technology. So that needs to be discussed, and especially to root out or try to root out any incorrect results from the use of such technologies. Another thing that the call mentions is the time component. And again, with the time, we've seen Theresa May say that companies have to remove content within 2 hours. Now, the reference here is that the companies will need, or the online service providers will need to remove the content within 1 hour. But if we look at the Christchurch attack itself, it took 17 minutes before, and it had already spread, I think 4,000 or some, that's an approximate number of users who had already watched the video. So 1 hour, it is, let's say, ambitious for the companies, but at the same time, 1 hour may already be too long to curb the spreading of the content. Should it be real time? Should it be shorter than that? And that is a discussion that needs to take place. But the reason why we have the Christchurch Call as one of the trends in May is because there was another charter, this time from Canada, which also tackles hate speech and violent extremism as one of its key messages. And the message there is clear also in the reports that came out as soon as the charter was published. Trudeau said that, and I'm quoting here, they have to step up, and I'm referring to the platforms, in a major way to counter, or in this case it is disinformation. If they don't, we will hold them into account, and there will be clear and meaningful penalties for violations of the laws and regulations that support these principles. So again, we're seeing that the countries are pushing for regulations, and also pushing even more with the penalties and other steps that they can take in order to ensure that the platforms really take more serious action to remove or to curb the spread of the illegal content. So that was the, in very brief, the trend related to the Christchurch Call and to curbing violent extremism. And now I'll read the comments that you have posted. Perhaps, Markov, you can summarize, that would be great. Meanwhile, we can go to the third trend, and I would say here very, very quickly, because we're today we're running really out of time. So, Katarina, I'll give you the floor to tell us more about what's happening with facial recognition technology.
Thanks so much, Steph. Wonderful to be here. And as Steph said, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it a little bit shorter than it might deserve in its attention. So again, in this trend, we're looking at AI, and in particularly, we're looking at facial recognition. So let us start in San Francisco, which banned facial recognition technology. So the Board of Supervisors in the city of San Francisco adopted an anti-surveillance ordinance, which, among other things, bans the use of facial recognition by the police and other city departments. There are exceptions. So, for example, the International Airport of San Francisco and the port are exempt. So are businesses and residents of the city. Why the ban? Why does this matter? There are two reasons. First, civil rights, and the other concern related to this ban is privacy. At Digital Watch, we think that this is a particularly important trend, and there might be some relevance for other states and other countries. We have to keep in mind that San Francisco is home to many technological companies, meaning that what we see here might serve as a blueprint for other legislation. Related to this trend, but now moving to Europe, we've seen a very interesting development in the UK, where a citizen actually launched legal action against him being captured by facial recognition. So he believed that he was captured by facial recognition in the public, and he was heard on the 21st of May, was basically arguing that citizens should be able to have reasonable protection from being subject to facial recognition analysis in public spaces unless there is sufficient suspicion of any wrongdoing. In contrast to that, the authorities argue that the way they were using facial recognition was not infringing on privacy. So here we have to see how this debate continues, but it really outlines the two key sides of this issue. Last but not least, let's look quickly at the reactions of the big technological companies within this trend. So this month we've seen Amazon's board rejecting the proposal of the company to stop selling facial recognition, meaning Amazon will continue to sell facial recognition software and technology. On the other hand, Google decided not to sell any general purpose facial recognition technology until there is regulation. And then, and this is quite important, and this is probably something we're going to continue to see and to follow in over the next month, is Microsoft. So back in December, Microsoft already urged Congress to regulate the technology. And in the run-up to the elections for the European Parliament, we've seen Microsoft make similar pronouncements, and this also comes in the context of the 5 Ideas, 5 Years article, which is worth checking out. So quite a lot of things happening. At the same time, quite a lot of things still up in the air when we're talking about facial recognition technology. With that, over to Steph.
Thank you, Kat, for the overview also on the facial recognition technology and what is happening in the States and the UK. And obviously the fact that San Francisco is the city banning the technology, that sends a signal. Exactly. All right, so I think we're at the end of the section on trends. I see that Vlada, you replied to the comments there, and I'm also replying to Sala. So what I suggest is that, Kat, you can reply to comments and questions in the text, in the chat, so that we can very quickly go through the main events and the update from the high-level panel and on digital cooperation, and then we'll give the floor to our colleague Andriana, because we have the regional development coming right after. So there on the slide you can see the main events in June, and related to the UN's high-level panel. There are quite a few developments. So the panel is expected to have the report for the Secretary General on the 10th of June. So there will be the launch of the report in New York. And although it is included in the slide at 17th June, another launch in Geneva, that is still to be confirmed. So it seems like there will be another launch a week after, but we will follow the official updates from UNOG, and we'll let you know. And of course, we will cover the launch there. There's also Eurodig towards the end of the month, and ICANN 65. Again, we'll follow these. International Labour Conference earlier in mid-June, and African Internet Summit, G20. So quite a few other events. But I think the launch of the report is probably one of the most anticipated events that will happen in June. And as you know from all the discussions that the Secretary has been having with the community, one of the most important aspects that the panel has been tackling is the upgrade of the digital policy mechanisms. And here I think we can reveal that the panel was presented with 3 models on digital cooperation, which they have explored and which we think will be presented in the report. The panel has also identified the gaps in the existing policy mechanisms and the key functions. So we can expect quite interesting dynamics around the digital policy architecture and the suggestions and the recommendations that will come out of the report. So one of the items that the Geneva Internet Platform will be discussing as soon as the report is launched is precisely these three models on digital cooperation and how they can be implemented. And here I'll move to the next slide. And in fact, it is slide is a bit the text is a bit not table-like. But anyway, the GIP is planning an expert discussion on the panel's report, including these three models, and it is planned for the 18th of June, but this is depending on the launch of the report in Geneva. So it might be 18 June, it might be the week after. Again, we'll keep you updated. I switch very quickly to what we're up to at the GIP and DiploFoundation. I mentioned it, the newsletter will be out, the May issue will be out by the end of this week, and I hope you found the new the new design of the newsletter, which we launched in April, useful. So the newsletter is, we hope, bigger and better. And also going through the upcoming initiatives in June, there's obviously the briefing, and for the Geneva-based colleagues, we have a 6-month review of digital policy developments, and that's planned for Thursday, 27th of June. Salah, we're unsure whether there will be streaming, but I guess that it will be in situ only. But at the same time, there will be a publication accompanying it. So the review of the 6 months will also be summarized in a publication. And with that, I'll give the floor to Andriana to take us through the regional developments, and we can continue commenting while we hear the regional developments. We can continue discussing in the chat. So Andriana, over to you.
Thank you, Steph, for the roundup of developments in May and for your questions. We now have regional updates, so please stay with us. First, we have Wanda Perez with the updates from the Caribbean countries. Wanda will tell us more about a new e-governance program in the region and about a World Bank program set to boost broadband access in the Caribbean. Over to Wanda.
Hello, everyone. In order to achieve greater accessibility and efficiency in the public's everyday interaction with their government, in countries across the Caribbean, BIT, the Barbados-based financial technology company, has signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the E-Governance Academy, IGA, the global governance and cybersecurity experts. BIT's executive indicated that some Caribbean countries are deriving efficiency by implementing e-government solutions, but many people can access these services because they are excluded from the traditional financial space. BIT's mobile payment app could securely and cost-effectively provide them with the financial access to these e-government platforms and provide those who are included with a cost-effective alternative to credit cards and other means. Another important news in our region is related with 3 Caribbean countries, Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, will soon boast of significant improvements in the quality of broadband access, thanks to a new phase of the World Bank's Caribbean Regional Communications Infrastructure Program, CEST. The World Bank-funded project is being executed by Digicel on behalf of the governments of the 3 countries. The Canadian-based company, International Telecoms, is in charge of this phase, which includes the installation of submarine fiber optic cable. The project will increase access to regional broadband network by bringing through broadband connectivity to schools, community centers, and government offices. It will also advance development of an ICT-enabled services industry in the 3 beneficiary countries. The entire process of installation and testing will take approximately 5 weeks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Wanda. Next we have Sita Lakshmi, who will highlight the developments from Asia. Sita will inform us about Singapore's new protection from online falsehoods and anti-manipulation bill, and about Indonesia temporarily limiting access to social media. Sita, over to you.
Hi, this month's update will start from Singapore. Singapore passed the Protection from Online Falsehood and Anti-Manipulation Law. This law aims to combat fake news. The law allows government ministers to order removal or modification of online content they consider to be false or where they believe such measures are in the public interest. The definition of public interest is very broad, and so does the meaning of falsehoods. Fines and jail terms are the type of sanctions. Workers' Party opposed the measures. They said to introduce such bill is not what government, which claims to defend democracy and public interest, should do. Asia Internet Coalition, an industry association, has described the law as the most far-reaching legislation of its kind to date. Government responded by saying that the law again targets false statements, not opinions, and that ordering corrections to be placed alongside falsehood will be the primary response rather than fines or jail terms. Second story is from Indonesia. A day after the announcement of newly elected president, Indonesia limits access to some features in social media. It aims to prevent the spread of hoaxes, calling for violent post-election attacks and demonstrations which led to riots in Jakarta in May 21st and 22nd, just a week ago. This decision imposes limits to the ability to upload videos or photos on social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, including Instagram and WhatsApp. Chief Security Minister said this is to avoid provocation and the spread of fake news. Up to I make this video, the limitation still exists. There is no due date on when the limitation will be over, depending on when the situation is stable enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sita. We now have Fontram Dennis Doe with updates from Africa. Fontram will tell us about an AI platform capable of translating 2,000 African languages, Rwanda's plan to regulate social media content to stop misinformation, and Teraco's Africa Cloud Exchange. Over to Fontram.
Everyone, I am Fontram Dennis with InternetGovernace updates for the month of May for the Africa region. I studied in Nigeria, where an ICT expert has developed an artificial intelligence platform for language translation. Mr. Emmanuel Gabriel, a Nigerian ICT expert based in Germany, has developed a global artificial intelligence platform called OB Translate, which is an online common administrative tool for machine learning capable of translating 2,000 African languages. Mr. Gabriel hopes OB Translate will break communication barriers in Africa by helping farmers to sell their goods and services in any language, and also offer employment opportunities. And secondly, Rwanda will soon regulate social media content. On Friday, 10 May 2019, Rwanda Minister of ICT and Innovation, Ms. Paula Ingabi, while replying to concerns on abusive social media content and false identities to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on National Budget and Patrimony, that government will regulate social media content to stop misinformation. Ms. Engabe said they have initiated partnership with social media platform proprietors to formulate methods of content regulation to protect citizens. Africa's interconnected vendor-neutral data center, TerraCo, is providing a secure and direct connection through its cloud exchange to local and global providers such as AWS Direct Connect, Microsoft Express Route, and Google's cloud platform. TerraCo has helped to keep traffic local in Africa since creation. Cloud operators will directly access African terrestrial and submarine cables, satellite connectivity, and an open market for interconnection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fatem. At the end, we will hear from Hanan Boujemi with updates from the Middle East and North Africa region. Hanan will tell us about AI-powered healthcare in Saudi Arabia, developments regarding 5G technology in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and the launch of Amazon.ai in the United Arab Emirates. Hanan, over to you.
We will start with AI-powered healthcare in Saudi Arabia. So recently, Royal Philips, a global healthcare technology firm, is partnering with the Saudi telecom company STC to roll out healthcare solutions powered by artificial intelligence in the Gulf Kingdom. The company said that the move could transform the ability to diagnose and treat patients in remote and rural areas in Saudi Arabia. In another briefing, the UAE and Saudi Arabia could be world leaders in the rollout of 5G. So the commercial launch of 5G services by the operators in the GCC countries is valuable to their ongoing digital transformation efforts as revenues from traditional telecoms continue to fall. Now, Etisalat in UAE will be the first major commercial customer for its 5G services, with network expected to deliver the Expo 2020, which will take place in Dubai. Saudi Arabia also established a national 5G task force to drive the technology deployment in the country. Last but not least, finally, Amazon has announced its acquisition to Souq.com. So they launched Amazon.ai, which features over 30 million products from local and international businesses, including products previously available on Souq, and 5 million products from Amazon US. Now, the company says that customers' shopping experience on Amazon.ai will enjoy the same commitments to great prices as on Souq, and at a fast and reliable delivery that has given Amazon the reputation it enjoyed globally. So thank you very much for your attention, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks to Wanda, Sita, Fontram, and Hanan for sharing the updates from their regions. That brings us to the end of our May briefing. I will now give the floor back to Steph.
Thank you, Adriana, for taking us through the regional perspective, and also to our colleagues for zooming in, for giving us a roundup of these important developments that take place in the different regions, in the different continents. And on that note, I think we haven't left any unanswered questions. If we have, please either ping us or email us. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next date is June 25th, again the last Tuesday of the month. And the final note is me thanking you all for participating in this briefing, and also to my colleagues for sharing their expertise. So thank you, and see you again next month. Bye.